What's up everybody, Todd here. Today we're going to install the Pro Comp 2.5-inch performance suspension system with the Pro VST 2.5 coilovers and the Pro Series upper control arms on this 2022 Toyota Tundra. Now I'll be using a vehicle lift to do this, but you can also use floor jack and jack stands. Now make sure you're subscribed to our channel to keep up to date with all the latest content. Let's go and get started. For this installation, I'll be using various metric and standard sockets and extensions, metric and standard wrenches, crescent wrench, channel locks, fastener removal tool, a flathead screwdriver, a pick tool, pneumatic and electric impact tools, a breaker bar, a torque wrench, and a ball joint separator. All right, so we're starting off on the passenger side. We're already up underneath the vehicle. I've got the vehicle supported on a lift, and I've also got the wheels and tires removed. Next, what we're gonna do is focus on our upper control arm. We're gonna use a 12mm and take off this bolt holding on our ABS line bracket. That way the bracket can be out of the way. All right, next what we're gonna do is use a flat blade screwdriver and very carefully pry the bracket off of here and get the ABS line loose from the bracket. We've got 4 different spots that we need to pry away. All right, now we're going to go ahead and separate the upper control arm from the steering knuckle, but we're not going to take it completely off. So what we're going to do is we're going to loosen up the castle nut. In order to do this, we need to first remove the factory cotter pin, but we're going to be reusing it, so we want to save it. So I've got a little pick tool here. I'm going to reach inside that cotter pin, pull out, and the cotter pin pulls right out. Next, I'm using 19mm and loosen up this nut. Now I'm going to use a specialty tool to break this loose. If you do not have this tool, you can also strike the boss with a hammer, and that will jar this loose. Okay, now it's up to you what order you do all this stuff in, but everything we're doing on the passenger side, we also need to do on the driver's side. So what I'm doing right now is doing everything on the passenger side first, then I'm gonna do everything on the driver's side. But one thing all has to be done together is this part. I've got this up in the air so you guys have a better angle of what's going on. But this factory skid plate needs to come off. We've got 4 bolts. They're all 12mm head. 1, 2, and then 2 behind here. We're gonna go ahead and take those off. Okay, now the skid plate bolts at the front are kind of hidden behind this little plastic air dam, so I'm just going to pry this down and squeeze my ratchet in there and pull those out that way. Pull our skid plate out of the way. All right, now let's go ahead and focus on our lower control arm cam bolts. Now each of our lower control arms is going to have 2 cam bolts, one in the front, one in the back, and we've also got the same thing on the driver's side. What we need to do is loosen these up, but do not remove them. But before we loosen them up, we need to have a relation point where we're going to set everything back up when you tighten it. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark both on the bolt side and on the nut side so that we know where to put everything back when you tighten everything back up. All right, now that I've marked, I'm going to go ahead and break these loose using a 24 millimeter. All right, go ahead and repeat that on the opposite side. All right, next we're going to go ahead and remove our sway bar bracket from the frame using a 17 millimeter. This is the passenger side. I'm also going to do the same thing on the driver's side. Okay, now I'm back over here on the passenger side. I'm going to go ahead and take this nut off that holds the sway bar to the end link. We're going to do this on both passenger and driver side. I'm using a 19 millimeter. If it decides to spin on me on the inside, I've also got a 6 millimeter Allen wrench to hold that still. Let's see. We're good. All right, we're going to set that to the side and go ahead and remove the sway bar from the truck. Okay, now what we're going to do is remove this bolt that holds the shock from our lower control arm using a 22 millimeter. Now we're going to wiggle that bolt out and repeat on the opposite side. Okay, we're going to be bringing this down in order to take out our strut. So before I do that, I don't want to stress my brake line, so I'm going to go ahead and use a 12 millimeter to take my brake line bracket off. We're going to put it back on after we're all done. Now we want to go ahead and support the lower control arm. I'm just going to use a floor jack. Now the factory strut is held into the frame cup by 4 nuts. We're going to go ahead and use a 14 millimeter and remove all 4 of those right now. Okay, now the upper control arm in the back, we've got one solid bolt that goes all the way through the upper control arm. It's held on by a nut on this side, and that bolt is a 22mm head and then also a 22mm for the nut. Now I've already gone ahead and loosened it up because it is really tight, so I'm going to go ahead and take that nut off using a 22mm. Okay, I've already got the steering knuckle secured with a bungee so that whenever I take the upper control arm loose, the steering knuckle doesn't fall forward. Next, we're going to go ahead and pull this castle nut off and pull the upper control arm free from the steering knuckle. All right, now we can go ahead and pull this bolt out. Now this is the passenger side, and that bolt is going to come straight through, and we can pull it out and remove our upper control arm. On the driver's side, before we can pull that bolt out, there is something we have to do first, and I'll show you that in just a minute. All right, now we are inside the engine compartment on the driver's side, because in order to get that upper control arm bolt out on the driver's side, we need to move some stuff out of the way underneath here first. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the factory driver's side air box. The way we do that is we undo the clips, kind of tilt it up and move this out of the way. Then we can take the factory air box and just kind of pull straight up on it. That pulls it off of its mounts and pulls it free from the factory cold air duct, and we can lift this out of the way as well. All right, next we need to move this box out of the way. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to unplug this harness. So we're going to push in here and pull up at the same time, and that unplugs from the harness there. Next we need to pull this pin here and this pin here to get this harness freed up to be able to move that out of the way. Just using a fastener removal tool for that. Next, we're going to use a 10mm and take out these 3 bolts right here. Now we can lift up, and in the box we'll be able to move out of the way enough to where we can pull that bolt out. All right, now the rest of the install on the driver's side is exactly like the passenger side. All right, so now we're back down here on the passenger side. We've got our upper control arms gone. We're going to go ahead and pull out our factory strut. In order to do that, we're going to lower our lower control arm that is supported, but I was just noticing I don't have a lot of play with our brake line, so I'm going to take the tension off of that just by pulling off this brake line bracket using a 12mm. Okay, now that we're supporting our lower control arm with a floor jack, we're going to go ahead and lower that lower control arm and pull out the factory strut. All right, there we go. All right, so here is our new coilover strut. Now at the bottom, I've already clipped the zip tie holding this together. So be careful with this stuff as you're putting it in. If something falls out, just make sure you put it back where it went. Now, This coilover is also offset at the top. So if you look up at the very top, this is the port where you would put in a nitrogen charge if you were to service the strut. That is going to be facing out away from the vehicle. So what we're going to do is go ahead and drop this down to get this low enough. Swing it inside the frame and then raise it up. And then rotate the bottom into its place. All right, now each of these 4 studs is going to get a supplied flat washer, lock washer, and nut. We're just going to put them in place for right now. All right, now once you have all 4 nuts in place, just lift up on the strut and get them all cinched down, just finger tight for right now. We're not going to tighten these down to spec until the vehicle is on the ground with all the weight on the tires. All right, now down here at the bottom of the strut, we're going to go ahead and put that back down into the mount. We're going to lift up on the lower control arm just gently enough to get this lined up and set in place. We're going to put the factory bolt back through, and it goes back through the same way it came out, so it needs to go from the back of the vehicle to the front of the vehicle, and put the washer and nut on the other side. Now as we lift that up, we may need to squeeze in on these components to get them to fit down in place. All right, wait. All right, we'll come back and torque that to factory spec later. Okay, now here we've got our passenger side upper control arm, and it's going to be labeled on the upper control arm passenger side. We've also got our factory pivot bolt. Now I do want to point out these washers on the factory pivot bolt we will not be using, so I'm going to go ahead and take those off. However, we will be reusing the pivot bolt and that nut, so we're going to retain this for installation later. All right, next what we're going to do is take our support ring and fit that into our upper control arm. Now everything I do on this one, we're going to do on the opposite one as well. Same thing with the driver's side upper control arm. We're going to get that right to about the center. Then we're going to take our bushings, and every single one of our bushings, we're going to want to grease the bushings all the way around. And we're provided with some white grease from the factory. So we're going to go ahead and put that on there. Now we're going to pop the bushing into the upper control arm. Do the same thing to the opposite side. Next, we're going to take some more grease and put it to the inside of the bushings. And then take and put a little bit of grease on our sleeve. We're going to turn it on its side and then press that sleeve in. Next, what we're going to do is put some grease on the face of both sides of the bushing. And we'll repeat the same on this side and also for the exact same process on the driver's side. All right, you also want to make sure you grease your fittings before you install your upper control arms. With your ball joints, you want to make sure that the sleeve underneath there starts to swell, or the boot starts to swell. That's when you know you've got enough grease. Okay, now when I get back up underneath the truck, it's going to be very tight, so I'm just going to show you how this works right here. Basically, you've got the factory pivot bolt. You're going to have a washer, that's one of our supplied washers, that goes on that. Then that's going to run through and then line up to wedge another washer. Then that's going to go through our sleeve that is on our factory truck. And then as that goes through, we're going to need to wedge another washer in between the sleeve and our new upper control arm, and then run that through. And then once that gets through, goes to the other side, we'll put the other washer on and then the factory nut. All right, so here we are back underneath the truck, and here we go. Right, now I'm fitting everything in place. Get this lined up. All right. Okay, now before we push the bolt through this part right here, we're going to take one of our supplied washers and fit it between the sleeve and our new upper control arm. And then once that's lined up, we can go ahead and push the bolt through. And once the bolt is all the way through, go ahead and put on the final washer and factory nut. We're going to get that finger tight for right now. We're not going to finally torque it until everything is on the ground with all the weight on the vehicle. Okay, now we've got this done on the passenger side. Once we get it done on the driver's side, just make sure we go back and put together everything underneath the factory airbox the exact same way that it came off, just in reverse order. Now we're going to go ahead and set this into our factory steering knuckle. All right, now when we connect this together, what we're going to do is use some provided red thread locker on this and then torque it down to 75 foot-pounds. All right, now we're going to use a 12 millimeter and re-secure our two brake line brackets. All right, now we're also given a couple of fir tree zip tie fasteners to secure our ABS line to the bottom of our lower control arm. We've got a couple of holes in the lower control arm. These will fasten too. So the way you want to do that is wrap the fir tree fastener around, and get it kind of close. Do that with both of them. We're going to take our fir tree fasteners, find the hole, and push them into the hole. And we're going to pull our ABS line to where we want it to be permanently. And then just tighten up the zip tie fasteners like so. And then cut off the excess. All right, now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the factory sway bar. We're going to get this up in place. We can connect it at the frame and tighten it down to factory spec at the frame, but we're not going to tighten factory spec on the sway bar end link until the vehicle is on the ground. All right, on all of our cam nuts and cam bolts, check the alignment. If that has moved, go ahead and move it back. Then we're going to snug down all these nuts, but we're not going to tighten everything down to factory spec until it is on the vehicle with weight on the ground. All right, now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the factory skid plate. It's actually a little more of a splash plate. But once you get everything lined up, tighten it down using a 12 millimeter. Okay, now everything is done on the passenger side as well as the driver's side, but I do want to remind you that there are some things that have to be brought to factory torque spec after the vehicle is on the ground. That's going to be your sway bar at your end link, your factory strut bolt, also all of your cam hardware, and then your pivot bolt up at the upper control arm. Then we're going to go ahead and tighten down our upper strut hardware that was supplied for us in our kit to 45 to 50 foot-pounds. All right, now we're back at the rear of the vehicle. We are at the axle. I've got the passenger side tire already removed. The vehicle is up off the ground, and I do have the axle supported with a floor jack underneath. We are going to be lowering this axle, but before we do that, we want to make sure we take any tension off of our brake line. So we're going to use a 12 millimeter and pull that bracket apart. All right, now we're going to go ahead and remove the rear sway bar bracket from the frame using a 17 millimeter on this bolt and this bolt right down here. Now we're going to be removing this shock, so the first thing we want to do is take off this nut up top. So what we're going to need to do is hold that still up at the very top with a crescent wrench and use a 19 millimeter to get this nut loose. All right, now once we take off the factory nut, we're also going to remove the factory bushing. All right, now using a 17 millimeter, we're going to remove the bottom shock bolt so we can pull the shock out. All right, now we're going to go ahead and lower the axle and remove the factory spring and isolator. Okay, now this is the area that the factory spring and isolator came out of. This is our new spacer. It's going to go up in that position. Now we've got a groove cut out right here. This is going to locate the factory isolator when it goes back on. So this is going to go right up into this location. Now this hole is also going to line up with this hole in the center. What we're going to do is we're going to take a supplied bolt with washer, go up through, and that's going to go up, and what you can't see from this angle is this nut plate is going to go on top and line up to this hole. This is going to go in. We're going to hold this still with a 9/16 and tighten this into it with a 9/16. All right, now we're going to go ahead and take the factory isolator, put it back into the factory spring. We're going to lift the spring into place. And then line it up and make sure this end of the spring lines up to the location at the lowest point on the mount. Just like so. Okay, now here is our new shock. The fill valve for nitrogen is actually faced to the inside of the vehicle. I've already applied some grease to either side of the bushing. What I'm going to do is slide one of our washers in place and then line up the shock to the factory mount location for at the bottom of the axle. I'll slide that on. All right, now we're going to go ahead and take our factory bolt with our other spacer washer and set that in place. We're just going to put that on finger tight for right now. All right, one thing I want to point out on our new shock is that I've already got one of the washers on. You notice that it's curved. That curve is going to be facing towards the bottom. I've also got one of our bushings that's got a curve on one side. I've got grease on both sides of this bushing, by the way. The curved end of the bushing is going to face the curved washer. So that's going to fall in like so. Next, I'm just going to rock this back and into place, and I'm going to hold it here while we lift up on the axle and raise this up into the factory mounting location. All right, once it contacts, we are going to stop. Okay, now we've got another one of our bushings. This is the exact same bushing. What we're just going to do is mirror it. So the curved portion is going to be towards the top. I've also got grease on both sides of that bushing. And I'll put another curved washer on top of that. Now the curve is facing up. Now I'm going to take one of our supplied nuts, put it up on top here, And we're going to start snugging that down with a 19 millimeter. Now we do not want to over tighten this. All we want to do is get it to where it's, kind of firm on here. All right, we're going to put the other nut on top of that. That's going to work as a jam nut. And we're going to lock those two nuts together and tighten down the top one to 60 foot-pounds. All right, now we're going to go ahead and take our bottom shock mount and torque that to factory spec. All right, now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our brake line bracket. Now, if you've got too much tension on your brake line, just bend the bracket up above that and go into the frame. All right, now everything on the passenger side has also been done on the driver's side. So we're going to go ahead and finally connect the sway bar to the frame. Do not connect the sway bar to the frame until everything is already done on both sides. Well, I went ahead and finished up the other side so we could reattach the sway bar. When we dropped it down, I tightened everything up back to proper torque spec, sent it down to the alignment shop, and got it aligned. Then we went ahead and put some 35-inch tires on there, and that concludes the installation. If you guys found this video helpful, make sure and give us a thumbs up. If you want to know more about the product we put on the truck, check the link in the description below. And as always, if you have any questions, call the experts or visit us online.